Okay, so this is my poster presentation for my research project, which was basically I wanted to take a look at the media influence from the news this year, being that 2020 was just like such a crazy news year, with all of the COVID-19 obviously being the main thing. And then on top of that, we had the election, we had protests, we had hurricanes. Um, just all the normal crazy Trump stuff on top of just the way it was handled. Particularly once everybody was stuck home for quarantine, I thought, this is a quite an unprecedented amount of people being, having to depend on the news, whether they liked watching it or not, to see kind of what was going on in their area. So, anyway, I kind of wanted to look at whether or not all this extra news coverage would result in people really increasing the amount of news that they were watching. And if so, would that make them politically apathetic when it came to the 2020 election, or would it make them more motivated and want to participate? So, anyway, I did some research on this, and basically there's uh, plenty of research on the last election. This being such like I said, an unprecedented year, there were a few articles and actually a few journal studies on 2020 so far, just in doom scrolling and the amount of negative news that's on and kind of the mental health effects it might be having. But there really wasn't anything on political participation or whether or not it was going to motivate it. So that's what I wanted to look at. It looks like you could go either way with the research. Sometimes research would say that all the negative news will make people more engaged. All the crisis news would make people pay attention, and therefore that would probably motivate more. Um, you know, Come election time. But then on the other side, there was just as much research that said that people get sick of negative news, and they may read the headlines, but they don't really want to participate or engage, and it was leading to a lot of political apathy, and which might result in people not showing up in this year's election. So that's really what I wanted to look at. So I created a study in Google Docs and posted it on Facebook. I also asked my classmates to take it. It was, just a volunteer study that asked people how much time they'd spent looking at the news in the past week, and asked them to answer in hours and minutes, which they did. And then it asked them if they were planning on voting in this year's election, because unfortunately I couldn't do it. After the election, I'd already written the paper, so we based it on voter plans. And so it was pretty simple to line up, I thought. Then we did the p-value, an independent sample t-test to look at comparing the people, because basically the way that they answered was there was 72 people in my study, gave the amount of news that they're watching, and it was a decent amount. On average, it was about 8 hours a week. And they all had plans to vote in the upcoming election. So what I chose to look at, thanks to Dr. X's suggestion, was that the 14 participants who didn't think they were going to vote, they said not yes. So either they weren't planning on it or they weren't sure. And we looked at their media watching habits or reading habits, and they were definitely lower. They were about 4 hours per week. The t-test p-value ended up being 0.038, which gave us the failure to reject the null hypothesis. It just wasn't enough. So basically, I need a much bigger study. Ideally, I think the way to make it more accurate would be to study specific data from specific websites that you would have access to the analytics, or cell phone data, how it'll give you the exact analytics, how long you've spent reading articles on certain websites, so that you could have the exact. My survey asked people to rate themselves. And so, when they say they've been watching the news for 8 hours a week, it may only be 6 or it may be 10, so that could be a little off. Plus, it would be better to take the survey after the election so you could see who actually voted. And even to be more accurate, have actual voter data from people when they're coming in and out of the polls. So if there was time and money and a way to do all of that, it would be a much broader study and might actually be representative of more of the population. So, yeah, that's my wonderful research project that took forever. I hope you enjoyed my nerdy presentation.